Snow covered the frozen lands of the north like a silent cloak, hiding the plots of fate that would unfold in the shadows of winter. Torkel, the solitary hunter, had never wanted more than the tranquility of the forests and mountains, where the icy wind sang a song he knew well. He was a simple man, with a bow that never missed, and a soul at peace with the silence of nature. His name, known only among the villagers for the skill with which he hunted deer and wolves, was not renowned for great warriors. But, like the land itself he inhabited, he was waiting for something greater, something that would force him to rise up. Everything changed the day the coastal pirates arrived. They were no mere raiders, but a threat that could erase everything Torkel loved, his village, his lands, his peaceful life. The threat hung in the air like a blizzard about to fall, relentless and inevitable. But Torkel could not simply stand by and watch. The solitary hunter who spent his mornings hunting and trading furs found himself faced with a choice: be a spectator to chaos or take control of his own destiny and protect what was his. It was a simple rescue that began, but the plot would expand, challenging the limits of his skill and courage, placing him against relentless enemies and a nature as cruel as the steel of their swords. What Torkel did not know, however, was that he was about to become involved in something much bigger than simple territorial disputes. The war between powerful jarls, the brutality of pirates, and the fight for survival in an inhospitable world would force Torkel to go beyond his skills with the bow. He would have to transform himself, face his own doubts, and, who knows, be something more than a simple hunter. His name would become synonymous with courage in a fight for life, not only for his village, but for all those who were at the mercy of the icy winds of the north. In a distant time, where the shadows of the mountains and the cutting winds of the frozen plains shaped the destiny of those who dared to live under their rule, Torkel was born. His name, although simple, would soon become synonymous with something much deeper, something that only the icy heart of the north could generate. He was not like the other Vikings, with their eyes blazing with desire for glory and wealth, nor like the fearless leaders who ruled with an iron fist. Torkel was a silent legend, a man forged by the cold and solitude of the vast lands he called home. His origins were not marked by great deeds or epic stories of blood and conquest. The son of Keld and Berna, a simple peasant couple, Torkel grew up in a small village hidden among valleys and dense forests. The trees, imposing and almost mystical, covered his home with protective shade, as if the natural world itself had taken the trouble to grant him a peaceful yet challenging existence. The village was small, with no more than 50 people, all of whom lived off hunting, fishing, and rudimentary agriculture. Life there, though unpretentious, required strength and perseverance. The villagers were like the land they cultivated, resilient but silent, with a quiet pride that made them invisible to the eyes of the wider world. From an early age, Torkel showed himself to be a quiet boy. While the others gathered around the campfires to tell stories of great battles and conquests on long winter nights, he preferred to isolate himself, listening to the wind cutting through the trees or observing the tracks left by animals in the snow. It was the silence that shaped him. He never had much interest in words, and when he did speak, his sentences were short, as if his mind was more concerned with action than with conversation. This made him seen as a renegade, an unusual Viking who did not mind joining those who sought recognition or fame. He saw himself as a simple hunter, living by his own rules, far from the limelight and the pride of the tribes. Torkel's skill with a bow and arrow, however, did not go unnoticed. His talent for hunting and his accuracy with the bow soon made him a respected figure within the village, even if he never wanted such attention. Every shot he fired seemed to be a reflection of his intimate connection with the land. There was no creature that escaped his watchful eye and steady hand. His destiny lay not on the battlefields, where blood mixed with mud, but in the silent forests, where life and death were decided by a single mistake. He was a master of deer and wolves, but also of something more primordial, the balance of nature. Torkel did not know the luxuries of great battle. His world was made up of long days, of animal tracks in the snow, and of deer hunting. As a young man, he would venture out for weeks into the frozen forests, braving the unknown and bringing back not only meat and furs, but also a sense of quiet pride, the kind of pride that doesn't need to be loudly proclaimed. He didn't use his strength to boast, nor his knowledge of the wild to gain an advantage. He helped when needed, but always with a simple purpose: to ensure that his village survived. And in doing so, Torkel became more than just a hunter. He became a vital cog, an almost invisible shadow working in the margins of village life. But Torkel's path was about to change. What he didn't know was that his skill and quiet nature would be tested in ways he could never have imagined. The neighboring village, a small community he knew only by sight, would be raided by coastal pirates. These brutal men were not like the ones Torkel had known, whose battle cries and bravado were followed by quick and bloody victories. The pirates came not just for conquest or honor. They sought to destroy, leaving nothing in their path. And Torkel, with his quiet calm and his cunning in the hunt, found himself forced to act. He was not a warrior, never had been, but the situation would force him to transform, to evolve into something he had never imagined himself capable of. His first confrontation with the invaders took place on the outskirts of the village, where the pirates had begun to loot the houses and capture the inhabitants. Torkel, with his eyes as cold as ice, did not hesitate. He did not shout, nor did he make dramatic gestures. With his spear and bow, he attacked with precision that had made him famous among the few who knew his name. His attacks were fast, effective, and almost silent, like a wolf hunting in a blanket of snow. In a short time, he had cut down 2 of the pirates who were attacking one of the crop fields. The combat was not epic, nor marked by grand words or heroic confrontations. It was simple. Survival was at stake, and he acted according to necessity. As the days passed, Torkel became something more. He did not seek glory or recognition, but circumstances thrust him into the center of a battle greater than he could have imagined. His exploits, though not grandiose, soon spread among the villagers. It was soon known that the lone hunter was more than ready to protect his home. But in doing so, he did not see himself as a hero. For Torkel, the real battle lay in staying true to himself. The lone hunter, the one who is not impressed by the flash of swords or the war cries, but who understands the true essence of survival. In a world of powerful jarls and bloodthirsty heroes, Torkel remained an outcast. He never sought to be remembered, never sought a place in the songs or poems of bards. But his skill, his silence, and his resilience were something that, in the end, could not be ignored. The hunter of the frozen lands would become more than a legend. He would become the thin line between life and death, between survival and oblivion, in a world that would never stop fighting. The icy wastes of the north were never just a land of hunting, survival, and fishing. Beneath the relentless white veil of snow, the cold was not the only enemy, and the biting winds were not the only forces moving the mountains and seas. The power struggle between the jarls, the leaders of the Viking tribes, was a game of shadows, disguised as battles for honor and riches. The lands of the north were coveted for their strategic position, their resources, and the promise of dominion over the seas. Yet a long-kept secret loomed over the lands Torkel called home, a dark truth that, when revealed, would shake the balance between the jarls and the entire region. The struggle for these lands began long before the pirate invasion, but the threat of the pirates became the catalyst for a chain of events that would threaten everything Torkel had ever known. The jarls were not mere rulers. They were power seekers, each seeking to extend their influence over lands that offer control over trade and shipping, 2 forces that could change the fate of a man or a tribe. Yet the land of Torkel, with its small, isolated village, was more than just a disputed piece of land. Its value lay in shadows, in something no jarl dared admit but all knew, deep down, to be true. The village of Torkel was a strategic location for the illegal slave trade. This dark, ruthless trade was a web of connections that stretched across the north, fueled by the misery of destitute peoples and the warlike needs of powerful men. The village of Torkel, hidden among the mountains and fjords, was ideally positioned for merchants and pirates to make secret and brazen transactions. When a man of power in a distant land needed human commodities, whether for forced labor, servitude, or as bargaining chips in a larger power play, they came here. The village seemed peaceful on the surface, but beneath its icy layers, it hid something much darker. The secret was kept by a network of few, those who understood the price of survival in times of war and instability. The slave trade was not something spoken about out loud, but it was whispered among the traders, among the men of war, among those who knew how to exploit the weaknesses of others. Torkel, although he did not know the exact details of the trade that passed through his village, felt the weight of it in every exchange he made. He was always uncomfortable with the shady offers and furtive looks he saw on the faces of those who passed through his village. But he was a simple man, and what truly mattered to him was ensuring the survival of himself and his community. If that meant tolerating something as dark as the slave trade, he would do so, but never without a suspicious eye, never allowing himself to be corrupted. The fact is that this secret would not go unnoticed for much longer. The Jarls, whose hands were dirty in many ways, had become aware of this underground trade network. But rather than try and destroy it, they saw it as an opportunity, a way to gain power and profit. Those who ruled the seas, the pirates, were merely an extension of this insatiable desire for greater wealth and influence. When Torkel's village began to be seen as a crucial position to control this trade, it became a target, and it would not be long before the pirates formed a coalition drawn by this hidden value. It was a cold morning like all the others. Torkel had left his village, in search of prey further afield in the frozen lands. He knew that as winter wore on, hunting would become increasingly difficult, but he was prepared. His bow was on his back, his spirit aside, and his eyes were alert to the signs of nature. He walked across the vast snowy expanses, hunting wolves and deer, creatures he knew with an almost supernatural instinct. He didn't mind the silence of solitude. It had always been his companion. The smell of the cold wind, the crunch of the snow beneath his boots, were like a melody he played with his steps. His mind was at peace, far from the worries surrounding his village. As Torkel hunted in the distant lands, far from the village's view, pirates began to gather. They were a mix of mercenaries, criminals, and adventurers, men from all corners of the north, united only by their desire to plunder and dominate. Their leader, a brutal and cunning man named Bjorn the Avenger, had learned of the clandestine slave trade that flowed through Torkel's village, and knew that if he could seize control of the village, he could become the new lord of the frozen lands. He gathered an army of pirates, promising riches and power to those who would join his cause. Each of his men knew that victory here would mean more than mere plunder. They would be rewarded with land, riches, and most of all, a position of power with the Jarls who ruled the north. The attack began when Torkel was furthest from his village, and it was a calculated move. As he roamed the forest, unaware that his home was about to be invaded, the pirates descended from the mountains and spread throughout the village. No one was prepared for what would happen. The villagers were accustomed to the silence of routine and had no idea that such a brutal attack was possible. The pirates went on a rampage, looting granaries, destroying homes, and capturing anyone they found on the streets. When Torkel returned, the scene he found was one of the most devastating he could have imagined. His village was in flames, the screams of despair echoing in the cold winds. He saw the fire engulf the homes of people he knew, those who had lived alongside him and shared the same hardships. In his soul, a silent fury ignited, and the hunter who had never been a warrior became, in the face of necessity, the last hope of his land. He knew he could not simply watch. He had to act. With his bow in hand, Torkel traced a path back, crossing the snowy terrain with precision and agility. Every movement, every breath, became a deadly dance between life and death. The hunter knew what to do, how to attack efficiently. The game of shadows was just beginning. He knew that, deep down, his village was just a piece in a much larger game, and that now he would have to choose his own destiny. The man who had never been considered a warrior would find himself faced with the need to fight not only for his land, but for an uncertain future that was about to be rewritten by the hands of the invaders. The bitter wind cut through the trees like sharp blades, and the snow fell in thick flakes, covered in a layer of dark gray. Torkel was immersed in the white immensity, his feet silent on the fresh snow, his senses sharper than ever. He was no longer just a hunter, but something more primal, more deadly. The cold was no longer his enemy, but an extension of his very being. He moved through the snow with a lethal calm, as discreet as a snowflake that falls unnoticed in the night. The battlefield was not a vast plain, nor the blood spilled on the sand. The battlefield was that desert of ice and silence. His mission was clear: to destroy the pirates who had invaded his village, and not leave even a trace of his existence. The pirate fleet approaching the coast was immense, a true force of plunder and destruction. When Torkel saw the boats in the distance, his mind immediately prepared for what was to come. It was not just a few longships, but a full-fledged invasion. There were 6 longships in all, their long wooden vessels jutting out like sea serpents, their prows adorned with carved dragon heads. Each ship was loaded with more than 30 pirates, men from different parts of the north, men who had been driven from their lands or who were seeking riches and fame. They were a mix of hardened warriors, mercenaries, and bandits, all united by an insatiable desire to plunder. Their faces were covered in animal skins and furs, their bodies robust and tattooed, as if they were extensions of the land itself. Their eyes, however, held a savage gleam, and their presence made the air around them vibrate with smoldering hatred. The pirate camp was set up on the banks of the fjord where the longships were anchored. It was a veritable makeshift fortress. Huts of leather and wood, piles of loot, and slaves guarded by armed soldiers. But for Torkel, all this was nothing more than a target to be destroyed. He knew that attacking head-on would be suicidal madness. The pirates were too numerous, and their strength was overwhelming. But Torkel was a hunter, and a hunter never faces a beast head-on. He watches it, waits, chooses the exact moment, and acts. He would be like the snow, silent and relentless, falling on the pirates without them knowing where it came from, with the fur cloak covering his body and a mask that disguised his face. Torkel seemed like a shadow in the frozen forests. He moved like a specter, gliding through the snow, hidden in his own stillness. His steps were tiny, his eyes alert to his enemy's every move. He slipped behind the trees, skirting the pirate camp with almost supernatural precision. His every move was calculated to the millimeter. He watched the pirates around the campfires, listened to their laughter and their dirty talk, and as soon as he saw them, he had already marked them for death. There was no rush. He knew that time was on his side. Torkel chose to attack the longships first. It was not brute force that mattered here, but strategy. He positioned himself in the shadows of a small hill, with a full view of the battlefield. His eyes scanned the area, and he accurately located the weak points. The pirates were disorganized, with most of them celebrating the success of the invasion, and without any suspicion of the imminent threat. Torkel knew that destroying the ships would deprive them of any possibility of escape. There would be no turning back for them. With deadly precision, Torkel drew an arrow from his quiver and fitted it to his bow. The arrow was special, with a sharpened iron tip, and carefully prepared to cut through any target. He aimed at the first longship, his mind calculating the distance and angle. In one fluid movement, he released the arrow. It cut through the air with a barely perceptible sound and hit the exact spot, the base of the first boat's sail, where the wood was most exposed. Within seconds, the sail was ablaze. But that was only the beginning. Torkel did not rest. He moved quickly to the next boat, doing his best to remain invisible. His every move was a calculated, unhurried dance, like the silence of approaching death. At the second longship, he fired again, this time aiming for the anchor cables that held the boat to the ground. The sound of the rope snapping was muffled by the falling snow, but the effect was immediate. The boat began to rock, and the water of the fjord, as cold as the pirate's own veins, began to take over. Another longship compromised. With each arrow fired, Torkel moved closer to the center of the camp. Smoke from the burning longships began to rise into the air, and chaos began to break out among the pirates. Screams of surprise and terror echoed through the camp, but it was too late for any effective reaction. Torkel was already behind them, moving like a shadow in absolute silence. He was no longer a simple hunter. He was the incarnation of the god of death himself, a specter come to claim the souls of those who had violated his land. The pirates tried to react. Some ran toward the boats, others drew their swords, but they were slow and disorganized. Torkel attacked one by one, his blades quick and accurate, without any unnecessary movement. He used the terrain to his advantage, hiding in the shadows of the trees, and attacking without mercy. There was no honor in his actions, only the need to end the threat once and for all. Within minutes, the pirates were being slaughtered without even understanding where the blow had come from. It was a silent winter storm that consumed them. When the last pirate was cut down, Torkel rose from the snow and looked at the burning longships. The flames lit up the fjord as if Helios himself had turned his face away to watch the carnage. The smell of burning flesh mixed with the freezing air, and the crackling of fire was the only music left. Torkel, The man who had never been a warrior but a hunter had transformed this field of destruction into his own work of art, a bloody painting of revenge and survival. With the pirates defeated, the longship set ablaze, and the camp destroyed, Torkel did not linger. His work was done. He turned, disappearing back into the snow, like a shadow, a specter that dissolved into the mist of dawn. The hunter had fulfilled his destiny, but the war was only just beginning. After the carnage in the fjord, Torkel became a legend, but not in the way he had imagined. The pirates who had invaded his village were now reduced to ashes and carcasses. Their boats burned to rubble, and their bodies scattered across the snow as reminders of a threat that had not had time to grow. The village, devastated by the invasion, was slowly rebuilt, but it was never the same again. Torkel's silence, that same silence that had always accompanied him, now seemed like a burden. He, who had never sought recognition, was now the symbol of something greater than he could have ever imagined. The wounds of war were visible not only in the village, but within himself. The hunter who had once walked the forest with tranquility now found his heart marked by the violence he had never sought. Even after he had destroyed the pirates and burned their ships, the war did not end with the last arrow fired. That Viking world was in constant struggle, and Torkel knew it. He wondered if peace, true peace, was something that truly existed for someone like him, or if he was doomed to forever be a shadow in the frozen wastes, a lone guardian, guarding the land until something new challenged him. But there was something deep that Torkel had known from the beginning. The real fight was not in swords or longships or war cries. It was in his soul, in the need to balance the man he had become with the man he wanted to be. The war would no longer be fought on the front lines, but in his own mind, and perhaps that would be the greatest battle he would ever face. Over time, the Jarls who become aware of Torkel's power and his ability to protect the village began to seek his loyalty, offering him titles and lands, wanting to use him as a strategic pawn for their own ambitions. But Torkel, hardened by the betrayal of words, refused. He was no longer the hunter who followed orders. He was a free man, and his freedom lay in the mountains, in the icy winds and the solitude of the forests. He cared not for titles, nor for the glory or riches that the Jarls promised. All he wanted was the tranquility of his land, where the only sound that interrupted the silence was the song of the wind and the crunch of the snow beneath his feet. In the end, Torkel set off for the mountains, far from the village, far from the conflicts and political disputes that threatened the peace he so desired. He knew that the pirates might return, that new enemies might arise, but he did not fear death. Death was an old friend, a constant shadow that followed him since the first days he hunted in those frozen lands. But perhaps Torkel's greatest enemy was not death itself, but the idea of being remembered as something he never wanted to be, a hero. He wanted no songs or stories told about him. He wanted to be forgotten, like the snow that falls to the earth, leaving no trace. In the final days of his life, Torkel became a mythological figure, a name whispered on the wind. He died not in combat, nor in a great battle, but in the peace he sought. It is said that before disappearing into the mountains, he left behind a bow engraved with ancient runes, a symbol that he had completed his cycle and found his place among the gods. Those who knew him spoke of his implacable calm, of the way he would disappear into the blizzards, as if the land itself had claimed him. But the legend of Torkel never completely disappeared. He became part of the stories told around campfires, in the whispers of bards, and in the reverent gazes of men and women who saw him as the true spirit of the frozen lands. He was a hunter, the man who sought no fame, but who, in defending what he loved, became an eternal figure, a symbol of silent resistance and courage in the shadows of war. And so the hunter of the frozen lands passed away, not as a glorified warrior, but as a man who understood the true essence of struggle, survival, and peace, however fleeting. In his legacy, the northern winds continued to whisper his name, and the snow, which had always been his friend, continued to fall soft and steady, like the memory of Torkel, the hunter who became the silent death of the frozen lands. Did you like this story? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next epic sagas. The journey continues.